The Philippine archipelago, a constellation of over 7,000 islands, has long been a crossroads of cultures and trade. For centuries before the arrival of the Spanish, the islands thrived with vibrant communities. These communities developed their own distinct cultures, languages, and systems of governance. Trade networks flourished, connecting the islands to the Southeast Asian mainland, China, and beyond. These early Filipinos, known as the Indios by the Spanish, lived in a world shaped by the rhythms of the sea and the land. The islands were not a unified entity, but a tapestry of independent villages and larger political units known as barangays. These barangays were led by datas, chiefs who held both political and spiritual authority. Social structures varied from island to island, with some societies exhibiting more hierarchical structures than others. Religion also played a significant role in the lives of the early Filipinos, with a rich tapestry of indigenous beliefs and practices. Animism, the belief that spirits inhabit the natural world, was prevalent, and ancestor worship was also common. The arrival of Islam in the 14th century, brought by traders from the Malay archipelago, added another layer to the cultural and religious landscape of the Philippines. Islam spread rapidly throughout the southern islands, establishing sultanates in Mindanao and Sulu. These sultanates wielded considerable power and influence, engaging in trade and diplomacy with their Southeast Asian neighbors. The northern islands, however, remained largely untouched by Islam, maintaining their indigenous beliefs and practices. By the time the Spanish arrived in the 16th century, the Philippines was a diverse and dynamic archipelago. The islands were home to a multitude of languages, cultures, and religions. Trade networks connected the islands to the wider world, and systems of governance, while varied, provided a degree of order and stability. The stage was set for a new chapter in the history of the Philippines, one that would profoundly shape the destiny of the archipelago and its people. In 1521, Ferdinand Magellan, a Portuguese explorer sailing for Spain, landed on the island of Homonhon. This momentous event marked the beginning of Spanish colonization in the Philippines, a period that would span over 3 centuries. The Spanish, driven by the quest for gold, spices, and the desire to spread Christianity, gradually asserted their dominance over the archipelago. The islands were named after King Philip II of Spain, becoming the colony of Las Islas Filipinas. Spanish colonization brought about profound and lasting changes to the Philippines. The islands, once a patchwork of independent barangays and sultanates, were brought under a centralized colonial administration. Manila, strategically located in the heart of the archipelago, became the capital of the colony and a bustling hub for trade and Spanish authority. The Spanish introduced a new system of government based on the laws and institutions of Spain. The encomienda system, a labor system that granted Spanish colonists the right to extract tribute and labor from the indigenous population, was implemented, leading to exploitation and abuse. The arrival of Christianity, brought by Spanish missionaries, had a profound impact on the cultural and religious landscape of the Philippines. Catholicism, with its emphasis on faith, hierarchy, and ritual, spread rapidly throughout the islands, often replacing or blending with indigenous beliefs. The Spanish built churches, convents, and schools, using these institutions to spread the Catholic faith and consolidate their control over the population. The introduction of a Western education system, though limited to the elite, opened up new avenues for social mobility and intellectual discourse. The Spanish colonial period was a time of both progress and oppression. The Spanish introduced new technologies, crops, and infrastructure, which contributed to the development of the islands. However, colonial rule also brought about exploitation, forced labor, and the suppression of indigenous cultures. The seeds of Filipino nationalism were sown during this era, as the people yearned for freedom and self-determination. For much of the early colonial period, the Philippines was governed as part of the Viceroyalty of New Spain, a vast Spanish territory that encompassed Mexico and Central America. This arrangement reflected the strategic importance of the Manila-Acapulco galleon trade, a lucrative trade route that linked Asia to the Americas. For over 2 centuries, Spanish galleons sailed across the Pacific, carrying silks, spices, and other treasures from the East to the New World. The galleon trade brought immense wealth to Spain and its colonies, but it also had a significant impact on the Philippines. The colony became heavily reliant on this trade, neglecting the development of its own internal economy. Moreover, the long and arduous journey across the Pacific made the Philippines vulnerable to attacks from pirates and rival colonial powers. The threat of Dutch and British encroachment loomed large, forcing the Spanish to fortify their defenses and maintain a strong military presence in the islands. In the late 18th century, Spain implemented a series of reforms known as the Bourbon Reforms, which aimed to centralize power and increase revenue from its colonies. As part of these reforms, the Philippines was placed under the direct control of the Spanish crown in 1764, ending its administrative ties with New Spain. This shift in governance gave Spain greater control over the colony, but also increased its financial burden. The Bourbon reforms had a mixed impact on the Philippines. On the one hand, they led to improvements in infrastructure, agriculture, and education. The Spanish established new schools, promoted the cultivation of cash crops like tobacco and sugar, and implemented public works projects. On the other hand, the reforms also increased taxes and forced labor, fueling resentment among the Filipino population. The growing discontent with Spanish rule, coupled with the influence of Enlightenment ideas, created a fertile ground for the rise of Filipino nationalism. By the late 19th century, Spain's grip on its colonies had weakened considerably. The once mighty Spanish Empire had shrunk to a fraction of its former size, and nationalist movements were gaining momentum in its remaining overseas possessions. In Cuba, a Spanish colony in the Caribbean, a fierce struggle for independence had erupted, drawing the United States into the conflict. The sinking of the USS Maine in Havana Harbor in 1898, an event blamed on Spain, provided the pretext for the United States to declare war. The Spanish-American War, though brief, had far-reaching consequences for both Spain and the United States. The United States, with its superior naval power, quickly defeated Spain, destroying the Spanish fleet in Manila Bay and securing control of the Philippines. The Treaty of Paris, signed in December 1898, formally ended the war and marked the end of Spanish colonial rule in the Americas and the Pacific. Spain ceded Cuba, Puerto Rico, and Guam to the United States and sold the Philippines for $20 million. The Spanish-American War had a profound impact on the Philippines. For the Filipino people, who had been fighting for independence from Spain, the American victory brought a mix of hope and uncertainty. Many Filipinos welcomed the Americans as liberators, believing that the United States, with its democratic ideals, would grant them independence. However, the United States had other plans for the Philippines. Seeing the strategic importance of the islands as a gateway to Asia, the United States decided to annex the archipelago, much to the dismay of many Filipinos. The American decision to annex the Philippines marked the beginning of a new chapter in Philippine history, one that would be marked by both cooperation and conflict. The Filipino people, who had long yearned for freedom, were once again under foreign rule, this time by a rising world power with its own imperial ambitions. The stage was set for a complex and often contradictory relationship between the United States and the Philippines, one that would shape the destiny of both nations for decades to come.